Thank you very much, Mr. Fall. Good afternoon, esteemed colleagues. This is a session to pay homage to the late Professor Samir Amin, who played a very important role in the life of CODESRIA and many other organizations, as well as the African intellectual community generally. I hand the floor to Professor Fatou, who will chair this session.
Mesdames, Messieurs, chers collègues, chers amis, nous sommes rassemblés aujourd'hui pour célébrer la mémoire du professeur Samir Amin, la mémoire de Samir, comme nous aimions à l'appeler. C'est vraiment un étrange privilège pour moi que d'être debout devant vous à présider cette séance. J'ai mis du temps à m'habituer à l'idée de ce rôle. Ce rôle, j'avais trouvé tout aussi étrange et très lourd lors de son enterrement au cimetière du Père-Lachaise le 31 août dernier. C'était un bel après-midi de la fin de l'été. Il faisait beau, il y avait du soleil sur Paris et nous étions là à enterrer Samir Amin. Il s'agissait pour moi, pour nous qui étions là, de lui dire, de dire à sa famille réunie et à toute une foule de personnes très variées notre admiration, notre immense affection et notre respect non moins immense. Respect en tant que communauté intellectuelle, celle du CODESRIA, dont il fut le premier secrétaire exécutif et qu'il a soutenu tout au long de sa vie. C'est étrange parce qu'à tous nos événements et à bien d'autres, nous avions l'habitude de le voir assis parmi nous, dans la salle, assis comme tous les autres chercheurs, les enseignants et les étudiants qui fréquentent nos assemblées en quête de savoir. Alors que nous célébrions ces 70 ans, lors de l'Assemblée générale du CODESRIA, Samir était tout aussi modestement assis dans la salle. Et en juin dernier, à l'Assemblée générale de l'Association caribéenne de philosophie, qui se tenait pour la première fois à Dakar, sous les auspices de l'Association sénégalaise de philosophie, Samir Amin allait être célébré avec deux autres personnes, Founou Tchuigoua, l'économiste de l'Université Gaston Berger, et Souleymane Bachir Diagne, que nous tous connaissons, de Université. Samir était encore assis parmi nous. Il était parmi les premiers à venir dans la salle et parmi les premiers à quitter l'amphithéâtre de l'UCAD où se tenaient les travaux. Et Samir continuait, comme à l'accoutumée, à discuter, à échanger, à écouter et à rire. Bien sûr, nous avons vu le personnage avec le documentaire qui a été présenté ces 2 derniers jours. Et nous allons continuer à parler de lui à travers vos contributions à cet hommage que nous lui devons. Mais je voudrais pour ma part retenir de Samir, outre son envergure intellectuelle et son énergie militante, jamais tarie, ce que je voudrais retenir de lui et que je veux partager avec vous, c'est surtout son aspect humain. Samir Amin comme personne et comme ami. Samir Amin avec sa gentillesse naturelle, avec son humilité ou son humanité. Je ne sais pas quel est le mot qui convient le mieux. Je n'ai jamais été l'étudiant de Samir Amin alors qu'il enseignait à l'Université de Dakar. Bien sûr, il était connu dans la communauté intellectuelle et l'élite intellectuelle, je devrais dire, des années 60-70. Samir Amin était connu et bien sûr, nous tous le connaissions, mais je ne l'avais jamais rencontré. J'avoue que la première fois que je rencontre Samir en personne, je le reçois à dîner chez moi. J'étais fraîchement mariée à Patédiagne, qui invitait ses amis, et Samir était là ce soir-là. Paté et Samir s'étaient connus dans les batailles d'idées en Afrique et en France. Et surtout, ce que je retiens, c'est que Samir l'avait convaincu, lui le linguiste de formation d'économiste, à soutenir une thèse d'économie sur l'intégration africaine qui dormait dans ses étagères. À la soutenance qui avait lieu à Paris, Samir avait invité Cardoso comme membre du jury. Donc ce soir-là, à la maison, je recevais le professeur Amin. Vous savez, à cette époque-là, quand on disait le professeur, on parlait vraiment de quelqu'un avec beaucoup de respect. Donc je recevais le professeur Amin et son épouse Isabelle à dîner. Mais à la fin de la soirée, le professeur Amin était devenu simplement Samir, et Isabelle, bien sûr, ne pouvait être qu'Isabelle et il est resté. Donc ces relations d'amitié, de chaleur que Samir entretenait avec nous, mais avec la majorité des gens assis dans cette salle, et d'autres personnes qui ne sont pas là, mais qui ont pu en témoigner, nous les avons entretenus avec des rencontres, souvent très intellectuelles ou autour d'un dîner, mais ces relations étaient toujours chaleureuses. C'est à travers les conférences du CODESRIA qu'au fond, je me suis familiarisée avec ses réflexions et ses écrits, et que je suis d'une certaine manière devenue son étudiante. Comme chercheur féministe, parler de la mondialisation, la globalisation, mais surtout à l'époque parler de la division internationale du travail, Samir nous avait aidés à le comprendre, ce qu'était le système. Sans dire qu'il était féministe, mais on avait retiré toute la substance de ce qu'il disait et de ce qu'il écrivait. Et les quelques fois où j'ai organisé des conférences, où j'avais besoin de sa présence pour discuter autour des questions dans le monde arabe, dans les relations entre l'Afrique et le monde, l'Afrique subsaharienne et l'Afrique au nord du Sahara, Samir n'a jamais refusé. Samir a été toujours prêt à présider, à animer une séance. Il prenait le temps de venir. Et bien sûr, il venait à l'heure. Et tenait son rôle de manière complète. Bon, à la fin, il nous globalisait tous et toutes, hein, mais il donnait sa substance et partageait. Il ne faisait jamais défaut parce qu'il aimait venir à la rencontre des idées et à la rencontre des débats. Je pense que je n'ai jamais assez dit merci pour cette attention qu'il avait à notre endroit. J'ai pris la liberté de prendre ces 2 ou 3 minutes pour dire l'émotion profonde qui m'étreint de présider cette session, que je vais passer maintenant à Thandika, qui a été l'étudiant, le fidèle, l'ami. En tout cas, Thandika a cheminé très longtemps avec Samir Amin. Il a été secrétaire exécutif du CODESRIA. C'est à lui que nous allons demander de présenter l'hommage avant de passer la parole aux autres personnes. Thandika, tu as la parole.
Well, thank you for the nice introduction. I'm informed by colleagues from here in Dakar that there will be a major intellectual event next year here in Dakar on Samir Amin's intellectual work. And that there we will have a full academic encounter with Samir Amin. My own presentation here is not written, I didn't have time to write a paper, but simply hopefully to indicate or to state some small things about Samir Amin that we all ought to bear in mind or that we all are aware of, but also to honor, perhaps more than anything else, the first executive secretary of CODESRIA. And we'll come to other attributes of Samir Amin, but I thought I should start off with that. Samir Amin was a very interesting institution builder. He obviously very important in the creation of CODESRIA, but he was involved in the creation of ENDA. He was involved with AirWard, the creation of Association of African Women in Research and Development. He was also instrumental with Third World Forum. So he was he created institutions. He didn't like administering institutions. But he managed often to find colleagues who would do that. Not that he didn't care about administration, he cared a lot about details of how things are run, but he himself did not like running that. CODESRIA, as you may know, has a strange history. It starts off as an idea in Bellagio in Italy. There was a conference of the few institutions of development that existed in Africa. And most of those institutions were held by former colonial officers. There were a few which were led by Africans. One was Niger, in Ibadan, and I think the IDS in Dar es Salaam at that time was Daram Gai had assumed office. But most others were run by either by the English or the French. So they met in Bellagio, and which is Bellagio. Some of you may have been there. Is a center which is built on the endowment of the Rockefeller Foundation. It's a beautiful place for reflection. And for about 8 years in a row, CODESRIA had access to that center. But the idea then was to coordinate this institution of social or development studies. But the few Africans who were there thought it should go beyond that. And when they returned to the continent, they decided to hold a conference, which was supposed to the name of the conference itself was the Conference of Directors of Economic and Social Research Institutions in Africa, CODESRIA. That became the acronym of that. And then they decided to have a second meeting was held in Nairobi. The initial point was that this was simply informal meetings that these directors would hold, and that the institution itself would move around from 6 months in one place and then move to another 6 months to another institution and so forth. It became quite clear early on that they couldn't do that. And that although they had planned on having it, the initial activity was actually documentation, sharing documents and research results. They found that if you did that, you needed some kind of permanent existence. And Samir Amin, who was director of EDEB, offered to host the institution for the first 6 months, and it stayed on until today. It's still in Dakar. But what they wanted to do, these directors, was to create an institution which would be autonomous and that which would be reflective of thinking by Africans on what are the major issues of the continent. But remember, the first grant, well, I didn't say that, but so you cannot remember it. The first grant to CODESRIA came from the World Bank and also from the Rockefeller Foundation. But I think after the process that came up with CODESRIA moving to the continent and changing its name now from a conference of directors, it became a council of directors, still same acronym, CODESRIA. Okay? And they brought Professor Onitiri from Nigeria to EDEB to be the person who would be practically organizing the first activities of CODESRIA. And they then had looked for funding, because the initial funding, I think, immediately found out that this institution was a little bit complicated, that it was not something you deal with, and they sort of pulled out of it. But I think the more important thing about Samir Amin is that when he had this institution at EDEB, now EDEB was a United Nations organization. And what Samir Amin had done, basically, was illegal, if you like. You don't host non-UN agencies at the UN institution without clear mandate from whoever is the boss of that particular thing. So that was a running battle between Samir Amin and the ECA in Addis, and then also in New York later on. And actually, it placed Samir Amin's career at risk because he had done something which he shouldn't be doing. And that Samir Amin was aware of the risk, but I mean, he took the risk anyway. It so happens that Samir Amin's interests in CODESRIA, besides his Pan-African agenda, had also a kind of an intellectual guerrilla warfare here. Being in the UN, being at EDEB, you cannot write about individual member states. Okay. So you need another institutional arrangement which allows for studies on individual member states. And CODESRIA was perfect for that. So you had in ADEP, perhaps discussing much larger Pan-African things, and CODESRIA allowing for country studies, if you like. And I also mean, it's interesting to find that these institutions in the South, like ADEP and the ECLAC in Latin America with Prebisch, had similar problems that you could not discuss member states, which probably explains why they both use center and periphery, that you could not, since you could not discuss individual member states, you ended up having categories that were state neutral. And CODESRIA, in a sense, allowed for this much larger, much more open debate about Africa. And I think, as I said, I think that this is one of the functions that CODESRIA played, at least in Samir Amin's thinking about strategies of research in Africa and institutional arrangements to circumvent some of the barriers that one faced in the country. So that is the Samir Amin, if you like, very brief account of Samir Amin as an institution builder. As I said, he didn't like administrative problems very much, and I think if you want to understand the CODESRIA as institutional grounding, you will have to look at a different person. You'd have to look at Abdallah Boujra, who is not here with us, who actually created the institutional framework of what we call CODESRIA today, which includes Africa development, the national working groups, and so forth. And they were very close, Samir Amin and Boujra. And one of the first things Samir Boujra had to do when he took over CODESRIA was to pay, the UN charged Samir Amin $50,000 for illegally hosting this institution, and they came up with all kinds of rents to be paid by CODESRIA and telephone bills and overhead costs. Fortunately, Boujra negotiated with the IDRC some funding to clear up that debt, so we paid back $50,000 to the UN. But Samir Amin helped CODESRIA then to find a new home, and he was very close to Senghor, and Senghor provided space for the Senegalese government provided space for CODESRIA and gave CODESRIA an unusual status. CODESRIA enjoys full Vienna Convention diplomatic rights. It's the only institution that I know of in Dakar, maybe since then, the only one which has full diplomatic immunity, which Senegalese government has respected all along. I mean, and one time we made a mistake, they almost punished us for that, but basically they have respected the rules of but importantly, Samir Amin did help us find this accommodation. I have, like everyone's talked about how generous Samir Amin was, I have a personal story to tell, and nobody has shaped my life as profoundly as Samir Amin did. Okay? In my professional life, Samir Amin did. I first met Samir Amin after a lecture in Stockholm, at the Stockholm School of Economics. I had, in that 1976, I had published a rather lengthy review of his classic Accumulation on World Scales, about 15 pages review, which was published in the Journal of Contemporary Asia. I was critical of his, after the normal praise of the book, I was critical of his works. And I sent a copy to him, not knowing that he would be coming to Stockholm. So after the meeting, I went to talk to him and introduce myself. He remembered my name. And he was very, very warm. And he was surrounded by everybody waiting to talk to him. And I stepped aside, he talked on, and we continued discussing. I invited him for dinner at our flat. And he was with his Isabel. So he said yes. That surprised me a lot. I was a student then, so they came for dinner, and I remember Isabel remarking that this is a very small flat. It was a very, very small flat. And Samir Amin was very embarrassed and sort of chided her for saying that this is a big flat. It was a very small flat. But anyway, we had a long discussion over my review, and sort of where he thought I was wrong and where he thought I could have strengthened my argument. It was very, 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 very helpful comment on my comment on his book. I then asked him, I wrote a letter later on to say I had a grant a travel grant to go anywhere in Africa I wanted, but I didn't know where to go. So I wrote him back, said, can I stay with you for Egypt for 3 months? He said, yeah, you can come. And I spent 3 months in Egypt, went back to Stockholm, and I got a letter from him, saying, he had a project on the future of Southern Africa. Do you want to come and coordinate that for 6 months? So I came here for 6 months. And as history would say, that 6 months ended up being 13 years in Dakar. And then after I left here, I went first to Denmark, and then while I was in Denmark, I get a phone call from him on a Friday saying, you should apply for a job at UNRIST in Geneva. I said, but the deadline is today. And so no, I'll write a letter of recommendation for you, and I'll get another one, somebody else to do it for another one for you. So he arranged these 2 letters of recommendation. They were sent, and they arrived on time. And I was given the job. Years on, I read the letter he wrote, the letter of recommendation that he wrote on my behalf. It was remarkable. I mean, anybody rejecting me would have been stupid. I mean, it was really, it was so well written and so generous in his comment. I had lots of, anybody who, Samir Amin was an interesting character because you have to really enjoy Samir Amin, you have to contradict him, You have to push him, not agree with him all the time because he gets bored, okay? You have to really confront him and he will fight back. I mean, he's not gonna, but he will not forget that and he will respect that. If you simply agree with him, if you go to his office, for instance, and you simply agreed with what he says, you will see him suddenly fidgeting with his pencil and his pen, which was a signal, please get out of my office. And those of us who sort of got to know him, you walk away from then, because that time, when Samir Amin begins looking for his paper like that, it means that, the talk is over, you can go on. But anyway, so he, as I said, and both those 2 positions of coming here to Dakar and going to Geneva had lots of impact on my career. So I'm personally very grateful to Samir Amin. Now, Samir Amin, intellectually, if I may be really, really presumptuous to say something useful in, how many minutes do I have? That's the good thing of having a chair with only 2 eyes. That it's really presumptuous, and I think that we all understand that we cannot really discuss Samir Amin today in full 3 hours. It's too little. But I thought I should indicate my reading of Samir, which has been useful for my own academic work. I saw Samir Amin work as sort of 3. I can divide in 3 parts. Okay. One is Samir Amin, the global scholar, who, towards the end of his life, became the most prominent part of Samir Amin. And Samir Amin himself used to joke about him belonging to what he is called the Gang of 4, which included Samir Amin, Giovanni Arrighi, André Gunda-Frank, and Emmanuel Wallerstein. And they were sort of world, working on world systems. But I don't think Samir Amin was really very much in that group. I mean, he had his own problem, his other preoccupation. And I'll get that. But anyway, that's one view of the world systems approach and all that, and some that people think of when they talk about Samir Amin in that kind of as a global scholarship. And that's one Samir Amin. Then there's a second Samir Amin, I call it the third world Samir Amin, who I think it taught us how to read so-called canonical texts from the North. Okay. The way people read Max Weber and all those the canons of the West. Samir Amin interrogates those canons other way around, from upside down. He takes Karl Marx's work, especially volume 3 of Karl Marx. I'm not going to tell you the chapter and the verse, but which gives an account of accumulation in the center economies. Okay? And he argues that in those center economies, there were there was the articulation between 2 key sectors, which is the capital goods sector and the sector that produces consumer goods. Okay? That the dynamics of these 2 sectors that drives center economies. And there are a lot of models which have been developed since then by the famous Indian economist Mahalanobis, Dormer, showing how these dynamics of these two sectors lead not to only to instabilities, because it's very difficult to have balances and so on. You can go on. But Samir Amin reads it another way than by saying, okay, this is a discussion of a closed economy. Okay? But what happens if you open this economy up? Especially if this economy is an imperial economy. What are the outcomes of that model when it's open to the third world? It produces economies which have a different dynamic. The dynamic is between what he called the luxury goods and the export sector. We export goods to bring back luxuries, and that was the colonial model. That, he says, is the outcome. The externalization of this model of the North produces a different order in the South, and therefore the South must be studied differently. I think that's a very important lesson, because normally we have a discussion of these sort of canons which discuss Europe, and we don't pay attention to what that discussion or how that reflection on Europe impacts on the thinking about Africa. Okay. So you read Hegel, but somewhere Hegel in passing says Africa has no history. And that is not just incidental, but it's a core argument to his having defined the dialectic of the spirit as a European, as applying to Western civilization. So it follows, if it is a Western civilization, the non-Western don't fit into his model. Therefore, they have no history. And I think Samir Amin's constant rereading of this text in light of what he thought would be the effects on the third world is very important. That's what I call the Samir Amin, I think, one major contribution. And the consequence of that is, of course, the economies which are the peripheral economies, and Samir Amin wrote a lot on how these economies, which were fundamentally perverse in terms of their structures, would have problems in economic development and so forth. I have personally benefited a lot just from that understanding of what Samir Amin was talking about, and it had lots of policy implications, of course, which were sometimes captured by people like Remaoun, the group in Tanzania who wanted to change their policies in Tanzania so they can produce, change this model of luxuries and consumption goods and begin producing maybe basic goods within Tanzania and so forth. That is Samir Amin as, if you like, as third world, looking at third world. He also, which followed again from his reading, that if this model of the North expands to the South, then, and it has to acquire certain goods from the South, it will have to do that on the basis of unequal exchange. And Samir Amin written one of the classics, of course, is on unequal exchange. The unequal exchange was not simply a matter of counting wrongly. It was intrinsic to this model, to this model, capitalist accumulation model, in its interaction with the periphery. And Samir Amin has a model which shows how this dynamic works out. But these are sort of, you might call the simple economics of it. But it had a much more profound story behind that, which was that the Marxists, the communist parties of the North, always had problems with the nationalist movements. How do you interpret, if your fundamental premise is class struggle, how do you integrate national struggle? And as everybody knows, from the Third International to the Fourth International, there was always a problem. How do you integrate, how do the movements of the left in the imperial part of the world accept nationalist struggles? Samir Amin, in that sense, you could say he was both Marxist and nationalist. And he wanted to place on the agenda the importance of the nationalist struggle, of the national struggles, that at least it had the same status as the class struggle. And as I said, this has been a big problem of the left historically. I mean, Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam had, I think he had to leave the Communist Party because they could not, the Communist Party of France could not really accept the struggle for independence by people in, in Vietnam. And within Africa too, we have had intellectuals who have had to struggle with this. Nkrumah had to struggle with the idea how to explain the nationalist struggle in Marxist terms. And you can mention Claude Ake. He called the development countries called proletariat nations, which was to somehow trying to reconcile the idea of proletariat and nation. And Samir Amin, in many ways, he had to deal with this constant problem of class and nation. And I would argue that some of the contradictions in Samir Amin and some of the tension in Samir Amin's work reflect the tension between the objectives of the national struggle and the imperatives of the class struggle. That's Samir Amin, so that ends Samir Amin 2. The third Samir Amin was our Samir Amin, the Samir Amin writing about Africa. We forget a lot about that. Samir Amin actually wrote quite a lot on Africa, about Africa. And I'll give you 2-3 examples, which I think are very important. One that became a problem for CODESRIA in the initial years, Samir Amin did not like national case studies. And because his argument was that this capitalist accumulation, it takes place at a world scale, right? And what we see in the periphery are simply manifestations of this accumulation at the world scale, and therefore any notion of typologies or classification of countries of the third world was basically what he called it superficial. You couldn't do that. But if you believe in that, you have completely undermined the existence of CODESRIA. Right? What would CODESRIA be doing if we are simply simple outcomes? So you can have almost a one-to-one relationship between the global and what's happening at national level. There's probably no point in studying the national level. And I remember talking to Bourgeois. Bourgeois was very concerned with that. What we do, I mean, if Samir Amin says we cannot, that national struggles. And he actually told me once, says, so what's the difference between Mali and Malawi, he said to me. C'est la même chose. Mali, Malawi, it's not the same chose. But Bourgeois persisted, and the idea of national working groups was set up. And so that's an example of Samir Amin did not like national working. Another example of Samir Amin's view of a national working group had to do with a project. He had a project on changes in agriculture in Africa. So he assigned me to do a paper on Malawi, and Gaku, a paper on Mali, and there was a colleague, Hamid, on Sudan. There was one more person in Ghana. I think it was Ninsin or something like that. And we were to look at what's happening to capitalist development in African agriculture. All the 4 papers concluded that something was happening in agriculture in Africa capitalism was expanding in African agriculture. And Samir Amin rejected our studies and said that it cannot happen. But no, he just said we must be wrong. And looking back, he was right, but for the wrong reasons. We were right in saying that there were attempts in the 70s to expand capitalist farming. You had in Ghana the rice program, you had the big schemes in Nigeria, or this feed the nation. In Malawi, there was a kind of an agrarian capitalist class emerging and so forth. So it was happening. But he was right in saying that actually the global system would undermine those efforts, and it did. Most of these schemes collapsed with liberalization. As soon as you liberalize, the rice farm, the capitalists producing rice in Ghana collapsed because the rice came in was cheaper. So he was right in that sense, that the ultimate outcome would be negative, but we were right in saying that in fact something was happening in the process. The strange thing about Samir Amin on this national question was that he wrote one of the best texts, one of the best case studies on nation development on Ivory Coast, which was the paradox. That I suppose he concluded from that there was no point in writing more. I mean, I don't know, but he wrote a text, which recently I was reading, somebody was reading a book, an Ivorian, has written a book on Ivory Coast, and very much addressing Samir Amin's question that he had on Ivory Coast, where he basically argued that this was the time when people were talking about the Ivorian miracle. So everyone was like excited, but Ivory Coast was growing, what, 10, 11% a year. And he was suggest that that miracle wouldn't last because there was a limit to extensive accumulation. If you're just accumulating, producing more, using more and more land and more labor, you will run into a serious barrier. But Samir Amin, in that, what I'm saying, Samir Amin was very good actually when he did do a case study. And I would actually say for the people who want to do case studies, read Samir Amin's work on Ivory Coast. You'll learn a lot, at least methodologically, how to deal with what kind of questions to raise if you're looking at him. The other thing about Samir Amin that I think is very important for Africa, and I must confess I have benefited a lot from, is and he was, as I said earlier on, he was opposed to typologies. He said they were all, he dismissed the idea of the typologies in the third world. And yet, one of the most, I would say, one of the most fecund classification of African economies came from Samir Amin. He divides Africa into three Africas. Africa of the labor reserve, which is in southern Africa, where the system only wants black labor. It does not want crops from African peasants. It wants black labor. And so labor is organized systematically and is moved to the mines or to the urban areas or to white settler farms in a very regimented system. In the extreme, natives carry a passport. That's the labor reserve. And in the so-called reserves, no commercial agriculture develops. The second was the cash crop economy. This is West Africa. The interest of the colonial system is not labor, direct labor. They want the crop from the peasants. And the crops are sold to merchant houses. And the process of production is controlled by the peasants themselves, the African or the households themselves. The third was the Africa of concessions, the Congo being classic, where the colonial system gives land or accords land to these concessions, which are allowed to use labor any way it wanted. And some of you may have read the King Leopold's Ghost book, which describes the incredible brutality of that system. And some of you may also have seen the documentary on Lumumba on Independence Day of Congo, when he had a speech, Zongola will correct me on this, but he had a speech to be read, which was supposed the usual speech when you thank the colonial government is going away. You often say we're grateful and we'll continue our collaboration. And the king the Belgian king instead stands up and insults Congolese people. Lumumba, you see in this documentary, Lumumba rewriting his speech. He completely rewrites his speech and makes what I believe is the best independence speech ever made on Africa. And he refers to this brutality of the Belgian system. Anyway, that digression. The idea is these three Africas. I have found that classification extremely useful, and I can just give you 3 examples where I have used it. One, I tried to use it, but it didn't work out, was that I thought by the time, I was brought up in the Africa of the labor reserves. So when I first came to Senegal in '68, I could not believe that you can play drums in the streets of the city on Monday morning. Because in the labor reserves, you don't do that. You only play on Sunday when the mining company allows you to play drums. So that got me wondering what's happened here. And when HIV/AIDS broke up, I tried from CODESRIA to apply for funding to do research on HIV. I was convinced from the Samir Amin perspective that HIV/AIDS would hit Southern Africa more than West Africa, because the labor reserve also involves the structure of family. You have young men living in the cities alone, in the township alone. You have the famous beer hall, where the mining company might have 10 prostitutes working in the beer hall for the thousands of young workers. And for those who have listened to Hugh Masekela's famous steam ailer, it is about the labor reserves. So I was sure it would hit, and I think later on people have accepted, actually, yes, the reason why Southern Africa was hit hard was not because of behavior of people in Southern Africa. It was because structurally, they were trapped in a situation where epidemics like that would happen. The second time I thought this concept I found very useful was looking at informal sector. I was doing a paper for the ILO once on the informal sector. The ILO was worrying, why is there no informal sector in Zambia? Obviously, in a labor reserve economies, there are no outlets for informal labor. It was blocked. You could not just sit up and, you are supposed to be working for the white man in the cities. You cannot be self-employed, which explains why the informal sector is so small in Southern Africa. And the one that exists, unlike one in West Africa, is mostly buying and selling. It's not very much production. The third case I found was that on taxation, that the labor reserve economies are high tax economies as opposed to cash crop. Anyway, this classification of Samir Amin, I think, is extremely powerful for classifying Africa. And so, despite Samir Amin's rejection of, categorization of Africans, I found that he has produced one of the more fundamentally most interesting. And so you have to reconcile this. He had world-scale thinking, and then these typologies that he introduced, and his national study on Ivory Coast. I think, and one of the dilemmas dealing with Samir Amin, again, this tension between the national or the nationalist perspective and Marxist comes out in some of the choices he makes politically in the African scene, which for us, some of us, were very complicated. We couldn't explain. For instance, his stand on Angola was very complicated, at least for those of us from Southern Africa. He was sort of more sympathetic to Savimbi than to MPLA. And mainly, I think, because at the global level, he saw Russia just another imperial power. So being an ally to the Russia, it didn't matter whether you claim yourself to be Marxist or not, he was negative to that. And I think that, and I think also he was so, because he had a very strong view of the importance of disrupting the empire. Okay? If you disrupt the empire, it was almost like a good thing. Sometimes you ignore the consequences of doing that. That if you may disrupt the empire, yes, but sometimes you could disrupt much more. And one of the examples of that was the Pol Pot problem, where you could have the fact that Pol Pot disrupted the empire does not mean it was immediately good for the people in Cambodia. Samir Amin was very committed. First of all, he was very committed to third world networking, and it became stronger towards the end of his life to be very active in. He got very involved. I remember once meeting him in Brazil for Porto Alegre, the social movement, the third social forum, World Social Forum. He was very excited about that. He actually began to see a social movement that somehow, for the first time, seemed to be responding to the world-scale capitalist system. And he tried. I think I had never seen him so excited about social movements that are responding to something. Now, there were, perhaps to end on Samir Amin. Samir Amin had lots of problems, by the way, if you want to deal with Samir Amin. He was an Egyptian at heart. If you push Samir Amin, he was a Jew. And when he's in his good mood, he could keep you busy for hours telling you Egyptian jokes. I mean, he knew so many of them. And as you know, the Egyptian history, jokes against the state have been part of the Egyptians' form of resistance for years. So they tell a lot of jokes about the state. He was also incredibly curious. He had incredible curiosity about things African, cultural things. I was once with him in Abidjan when he says to me, "Look, I'm going to Yamoussoukro tomorrow. Do you want to come?" I said, "Yeah, okay. I've never been there." So we drove to Yamoussoukro. I was not sure what he wanted to see there. Does he want to see the new capital? The new. What? So we got there. It turned out he wanted to see the cathedral. This immense cathedral. that also surprised me. Why would you want to see the cathedral? When we got there, he was looking for one picture. There was there are these, what you call these murals, what do you call these big glasses, and they're paintings of angels and and they are all white. But there's one when there's a black man, a happy black man carrying the cross. And that was Houphouët-Boigny, the president. So, and that's what Samir wanted to see. He wanted to make sure if that was true. Was it true that, in fact, in this cathedral, there's a man carrying a cross with a happy smile, and that was the only African in those murals. That was one thing. The other thing that Samir Amin loved very much was African cuisine, On our way from Abidjan, we stopped in all these little strange places where he wanted to eat Ivorian meats from the forest, and he knew a lot about them. I mean, he like everywhere he went, he wanted to test a little bit of what Samir saw there. So he was a nightmare of every chairperson at any meeting, because it's very it was difficult to stop Samir Amin talking, because he starts off a speech and there's a logic to it, okay? And that if you stop it, at some point, you're stopping the whole logic. So you sort of wait for him to come to the conclusion. And his speeches, you could actually transcribe them and type them tomorrow morning. It's a full lecture. Okay? That's ordered, which created problems for chairpersons, because one, you cannot stop him, but secondly, he didn't sometimes care what was the topic of the discussion, because you'd have a thought of the month that it bothers him, and you came to a conference, and you can actually switch a conference entire agenda by actually almost convincing you that what you're talking about is rubbish, it's not important, but the main issue is this, and he will give a very good, logical, structured thing. So I was just wondering, what would you have said about this meeting if he was here? What was Samir? Mind you, this is the first time Samir Amin is not with us for the General Assembly. Samir Amin never missed a CODESRIA General Assembly. And normally he would come a little bit late, shuffling in, and at some point he'd make an intervention. I was just wondering, what would he say about our discussions here? I wrote some notes down, and I realized, no, if I say it, it will offend people, so I'm not going to say it. He would have said lots of things about it. But finally, I think that Samir Amin was, for those who worked close to him, as I said, the best way to deal with Samir Amin was sometimes to contradict him just to hear his views, what he will say, because he always had a very interesting interpretation of things. But I also think, contrary to what people thought, Samir Amin liked a good fight intellectually. He was he didn't like idle talk. I mean, that was another. You cannot sit down and talk to Samir Amin about Manchester United or something that he would walk away. But I think he was a very open to discussion, and he was infinitely polite. And I have seen Samir Amin insulted in a meeting. One of the meetings actually organized by CODESRIA on the future of Africa. And he took it, I was waked up, but he took it very lightly, and he listened, and and he would say, normally he would say, that's your opinion, that's, we cannot say it, say to it, that's your views. He was extremely polite, but he had problem concealing his impatience with mediocrity and idle talk. And finally, the worst thing you could be from Samir Amin, by the way, is not to be a good Marxist or not. The worst thing you would be if he thought you are an agent of imperialism. That was the worst sin you could commit. You could be a bad Marxist, you could be what, that didn't mind. But if you have if you are not a nationalist in the sense of, or you're defending Africa's interest, you would upset him enormously. So we will miss Samir, but I think he will. And I hope that we can now that Samir Amin is not with us, we can read him critically. I said, Samir Amin, you have to read him critically. He's a mind at work, and there are many times as I said, like any great text, there are many problems with it. And I think we should the world will read Samir Amin in the world scale. I think we should read our Samir Amin, the things that Samir Amin said that were very interesting for Africa, and see whether we can build on that. Thank you for your patience.
Merci beaucoup. Merci Thandika de nous avoir fait cette présentation. C'était une vraie gageure de prendre 40 à 50 minutes pour présenter un personnage aussi complexe que Samir, un personnage aux mille et une facettes, et vous avez réussi à remettre dans un individu toutes ses caractéristiques. Vous l'avez fait avec beaucoup d'intelligence et surtout beaucoup d'humour. Et j'ai vraiment retrouvé, quand vous parliez, il me semblait que Samir était assis là et je le voyais bien réagir comme vous l'avez indiqué. Merci beaucoup. Alors, comme c'est une cérémonie d'hommage, la présentation ne sera pas discutée. Je vais passer maintenant la parole au représentant du Forum du Tiers-Monde que Samir Amin avait créé, le professeur Moustapha Kassé, économiste. Vous avez la parole. Alors, bien sûr, maintenant, je donnerai moins de temps. Vous aurez un temps un peu plus court. Parce que ce que nous voulons, c'est donner à un maximum de personnes dans cette salle la possibilité de rendre hommage à Samir Amin. Nous avons quelques personnes qui sont prévues, qui sont sur le podium, et après, la parole sera donnée à la salle pour dire leur hommage. Merci beaucoup.
Merci bien, Madame Bien. Je serai très, très bref, pour deux raisons. La première, c'est que hier, nous avions eu toute la journée au niveau précisément de l'école doctorale de sciences économiques, un hommage à Samir Amin, qui était évidemment un débat pas seulement de témoignages, mais également un débat sur son œuvre, sur ce qu'il a fait particulièrement. Et à l'occasion, il y a juste 2 jours après son décès, j'avais fait un petit texte qui était un texte de théorie économique pour inviter effectivement à ce que l'hommage ne soit pas simplement un hommage, qu'on aille bien au-delà, et que c'est un appel à la réflexion sur les recherches des alternatives au système actuel. Et j'avais dit également, montrer précisément un certain nombre de pistes. Parce que, donc, le travail que j'ai présenté hier à nos étudiants et à nos enseignants, je ne vais pas le faire parce que ce serait peut-être trop long. D'autant plus, nous l'avons fait avec d'autant plus d'allant qu'il y avait peut-être 3 générations qui auraient pu témoigner précisément de l'apport de Samir Amin à la science économique. Il y a eu nous autres, cette première génération, parce que j'ai connu Samir Amin en 1960. Quand il a juste quitté le ministère des Finances, il est venu à Bamako comme conseiller technique. Et c'est Gologo qui me l'a présenté. J'étais jeune marxiste, membre du comité central du Parti africain d'indépendance qui était dans la clandestinité, et notre siège se trouvait à Bamako. Gologo m'avait dit, au fond, je vais vous présenter à quelqu'un. Je suis persuadé que vous vous entendrez bien, qui est un conseiller de Modibo à l'époque. Depuis lors, on ne s'est pas quitté. À travers de multiples activités. Mais je vais simplement en souligner quelques-unes. Alors, après Bamako, il a rendu au pays un service énorme. Le parti était dans la clandestinité et le coup d'État se préparait à l'époque. Il a informé Majmout et particulièrement les camarades qui étaient avec lui à l'époque, Abdou Moumini et les autres, les a informés que de toute façon la situation politique n'était pas bonne ici et qu'ils devaient prendre des précautions. C'est après, le coup d'État est intervenu et les camarades ont quitté précisément Bamako pour Alger. Entre-temps, moi-même, je suis parti à Alger, j'ai été les accueillir et je les ai logés, effectivement, après contact avec le gouvernement algérien. Alors, depuis ce jour, quand j'ai terminé mes premières années d'études, je suis rentré au Sénégal, obligé d'ailleurs, et j'ai retrouvé également que Samir s'est installé. Alors, c'est dans les années 69. Quand on s'est vu, il m'a dit la meilleure chose que nous pouvons faire pour la nouvelle élite africaine, c'est effectivement de nous mettre à lire Marx par le texte. C'est-à-dire qu'il faut qu'on arrive à trouver tous les ouvrages de Marx et que nous nous mettions effectivement à lire Marx par le texte. Alors, nous avions à l'époque les ouvrages des éditions sociales, il y avait les éditions de Moscou, etc., et d'autres éditions qui étaient en anglais, et les œuvres de jeunesse et tout ça, et toute cette littérature. On se réunissait chez lui tous les jours et il nous entretenait en tout. Et il y avait parmi nous un de nos collègues qui était un brillant intellectuel. Peut-être Madame Diagne pourra se souvenir, Samba Ndiaye. Une tête particulièrement brillante. Samir l'avait logé chez lui et nous nous y retrouvions avec bien d'autres. Amadi n'était pas encore là, il y avait certains de ses assistants, etc. Alors, la chose très croustillante d'ailleurs, une fois tout le monde est parti en vacances, on s'est dit on va suspendre. Et quand il est revenu, tous les meubles de la maison ont été vendus, c'était vide. Alors moi j'ai été le prendre, je lui ai dit mais il y a un problème particulier, on a vidé la maison. Il dit on nous a volé, j'ai dit non, on ne nous a pas volé. Alors attends, tu vas voir, quand on est arrivé à la maison, il n'y avait pas un petit banc. Bati avait effectivement vendu tous les meubles. Alors, il est parti à Kaolack. Quand il est revenu, alors, il a dit, mais tu n'es pas sérieux? Il dit, mais c'est vous qui n'êtes pas sérieux. Comment? Vous partez en vacances avec vos cravates, vos poches pleines d'argent, vous me laissez ici, mais qu'est-ce que vous voulez? Vous voulez pas que je meure? Vous voulez quand même pas que je meure? Alors, je n'avais que ça. La réponse de Samir a été ceci. Nous avons tort. On n'aurait pas dû le laisser ici sans argent. Je garde toujours effectivement cette réponse. On n'aurait pas dû partir et le laisser là et sans argent parce qu'il ne travaillait pas. Alors, des épisodes comme ça, je peux en raconter. D'autant plus qu'après, quand on a ouvert le diplôme d'études supérieures en sciences économiques, j'étais parmi les premiers à être inscrit comme quelqu'un qui avait déjà la maîtrise, à l'époque on disait la licence. Et nous avions dans le corps professoral, évidemment, comme cela existe en sciences économiques, des écoles absolument différentes et qui se heurtaient du point de vue idéologique. Alors, nous avions un peu ce qu'il appelait les théoriciens de l'économie standard, c'est-à-dire les praticiens, ou en tout cas les théoriciens du modèle néoclassique, auquel il était absolument opposé. Il y avait une dame qui avait fait une brillante thèse sur la planification en Union soviétique, Madame Hassan, Meyer, et il y avait lui. Et il y avait également, évidemment, des libéraux bontins, comme le président Abdoulaye Wade. Alors, c'était donc ça qui constituait à l'époque le corps professoral. Nous étions 4 étudiants, voire 5. Le 5e a désisté, il n'est plus revenu. Nous sommes restés donc 4 étudiants. Alors, les 3 ont opté pour la filière de Samir Amin. Ils nous avaient convaincus. D'ailleurs, ça a mis en furie tout le monde. Mais pourquoi tous les étudiants s'orientent là et pas ailleurs? Et ensuite, quels sont les étudiants qui vont animer précisément les autres sections qui ont été mises en place? Par exemple, on avait une section de technique quantitative, on avait une autre section de théorie libérale sur les relations économiques internationales, etc. Mais malheureusement, il n'y avait pas de clientèle pour eux. Alors, depuis, nous avons travaillé ensemble et tous les jours, vraiment, si je me mettais à raconter les péripéties ou en tout cas tout ce qu'on a traversé, peut-être qu'on n'en sortirait pas. Et c'était l'époque où, évidemment, il avait écrit déjà un certain nombre d'ouvrages relatifs à l'Afrique. Si je prends le panorama de la littérature... ça commence. Ça commence bien. Alors, si donc je me dis, au fond, j'avais à relater toutes ces péripéties, nous n'allons pas nous en sortir. Mais je relaterai simplement une chose qui me concerne directement. Peut-être moi-même et ensuite un autre collègue extrêmement connu dans le milieu des intellectuels, le professeur Amadien. Il y avait au bout, quand j'avais terminé ma thèse de doctorat, alors je lui ai demandé de patronner cette thèse. Et il m'a dit non, ils vont te massacrer. Si moi je patronne, ça va être précisément le couperet pour toi. Mais bon, je suis persuadé que tu as fait un bon travail et que tu peux effectivement polémiquer et me défendre sans que moi je sois là. Je ne viendrai même pas à ta soutenance. Ça, c'est Samir. Je ne viendrai pas à ta soutenance parce qu'il y avait l'antécédent amadien. Il n'a même pas voulu daigner venir à ma soutenance. Je ne sais pas, je ne lui en ai jamais voulu d'ailleurs, mais je me suis dit, j'ai absolument bien compris. Donc, si vraiment, et à l'époque, nous l'avons aidé jusqu'à la publication d'une de ses œuvres, de 3 de ses œuvres, de 3 de ses ouvrages centraux, l'accumulation à l'échelle mondiale, qui avait suscité énormément de polémiques dans le milieu. Puis ensuite, le développement du capitalisme en Côte d'Ivoire et enfin l'Afrique de l'Ouest bloquée. Je crois que je garde effectivement de cette période et retiens que Samir a eu une carrière immense d'universitaire, de chercheur, d'écrivain politique et une variété d'activités comme conseiller de gouvernement, comme conseiller des organisations et avec le souci permanent de dire chercher les alternatives effectivement pour sortir nos pays de la misère et de la pauvreté. Ça, c'était sa préoccupation fondamentale. Et je pense que nous n'allons pas arrêter ce travail-là, ici à ce simple hommage, et il faudra qu'on aille, comme nous avons essayé de le faire hier, qu'on aille dans le fond, que ça ne soit pas une espèce de Samir est gentil, il a fait beaucoup de choses, etc., qu'on essaie d'ouvrir la boîte noire de tout le travail qu'il a consacré à l'Afrique, chacun dans sa spécialité. Ça nous permettra effectivement de voir quelles sont les alternatives qu'il propose, quels sont les points de convergence avec lui. Peut-être aussi, nous sommes des chercheurs, quels sont les points de divergence. Et c'est peut-être le meilleur service que nous pouvons rendre effectivement à Samir. Et ça a été le cas hier. Quand j'ai vu par exemple Logosila, qui n'est pas un économiste, mais qui est un brillant historien, c'est même pas ton étudiant, c'est ton étudiant au 2e ou 3e degré. J'allais dire, ce sont les petits-fils. Il y a quelqu'un qui a eu la formule, c'est Mamadou Dansoko, qui a eu cette formule magnifique de dire qu'autour de cette salle, il y a les pères et les grands-pères, il y a les pères, les frères et les jeunes fils. Alors, nous avions conclu cet hommage en disant le travail ne fait que commencer. Il faudrait que nous arrivions à susciter des réflexions profondes sur l'immense œuvre qu'il nous a léguée, afin que nous puissions trouver de meilleures alternatives théoriques, n'est-ce pas, pour sortir de la situation actuelle de notre continent. Je suis persuadé que nous n'en sommes pas satisfaits. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Moustapha. Je voudrais passer la parole maintenant à Madame Lau Kinchi de Lingnan University, Hong Kong, qui est le coordinator of Global University for Sustainability. Vous avez la parole. Alors, peut-être une dizaine de minutes.
Dear friends, I'm very honored to be attending this General Assembly of CODESRIA. From Professor Samir Amin's memoirs, I had read about how he fought for CODESRIA to be set up not as an organization where university social science research institutes would choose the leadership and decide on the programs, but as a platform to promote independent and audacious African reflections on contemporary challenges and involve not only university academics, but also intellectual activists in civil society. I could not help smiling when I read how he changed the full name of CODESRIA from Conference of Directors of Institutes of Research in Africa to Council for the Development of Social Science Research in Africa, thus giving the space for necessary and fruitful interactions among intellectuals for meeting the challenges of our times. That was Samir, insistent on his vision and at the same time had the competence to strategize and make things work despite all the bureaucracies and obstacles. I'm very honored to be here to celebrate the 45th anniversary of CODESRIA and to meet some of the best activist intellectuals in Africa. Professor Mahmoud Mamdani, along with the late Professor Samoyo, were mentioned when Samir recalled the inauguration of CODESRIA in 1973 and the initial years when he was the first executive secretary. He referred to them as young scholars making important contributions. Indeed, Professor Mamdani at that time was young. He was not even 30 years old. And it is a pleasure to meet the young Professor Mamdani in person today. This morning, Mr. Wole Soyinka stressed the keyword dignity. Yesterday, I chatted with Professor Lumbumba on memories of pride in being African. The pride is, I believe, the most important weapon we have in countering imperialist aggression and Eurocentric hegemony. In my years of relating to Samir, I always appreciated his pride in being Egyptian, in being African. This constituted the spirit and the ground from which he critiqued Eurocentrism and proposed sovereignty of the nation being inseparable from the sovereignty of the people within the nation. It was in the year 2000 that Samir and I came to be acquainted. We were both invited to a conference organized by Ubuntu in Barcelona, which was a network of networks. Over breakfast, we happened to be sitting at the same table. Samir asked me where I was from, and I said, Hong Kong. His eyes glistened, and he enthusiastically told me, You must link up with one excellent group in Hong Kong, and that has done marvelous intellectual work with many good intellectuals. I listened in earnest. He said, the name of the group is ARENA, Asian Regional Exchange for New Alternatives. And I told him, I am the co-chair of ARENA. And he burst out laughing, gave me a big hug, and that instant sealed our friendship and our sustained effort to work together in the World Forum for Alternatives, the Global University for Sustainability, and other global projects. In Samir's company, we listened to wise and incisive analysis of the world's crisis and the challenges for movements, but we would not feel grim or pessimistic. Samir's optimism was contagious. He would present his analysis in a persuasive manner and always pointing to possibilities for action and hope. Now and again, he would crack a joke. Samir would start in a very serious tone, as if he were to give a lecture. Then he would himself be so amused and laughing heartily before his listeners joined in the jesting. Samir was such a person of good humor and modesty, integrity and dedication, with passion for life and the pleasures of life. Thus, also his audacity in rejecting idiocy and tyranny of dictators and injustice and fraud of elites and tycoons. I come from a comparative literature background, and I'm always interested in the actual life experiences that shape one's personality. I had done many interviews with Samir, and he had talked of his childhood. He told me how he was born with jaundice, and for a whole year when he was a baby, he couldn't swallow anything, not milk, not water, nothing. And fortunately, his parents were the doctors, so they injected serum. But then he was fortunately saved when a peasant woman one day came by and told them, well, you should use this particular herb. And then he somehow improved. But he was not not supposed to have cream or chocolate. So while his sister was enjoying all the chocolate in front of him, you can imagine how strong he had to temper his willpower to resist the chocolate and the cream. And if we are to situate Samir in his context, we can also see how his militancy and activism was connected to his experiences. Well, he was very fond of telling the story of how he became a communist at the age of 6. So he was saying, well, his mother was taking him along the road, and he saw a child at his same age taking some garbage and putting that from the ground and putting that in the mouth. And he asked from his mother, what's he doing? Huh? And the mother said, well, the society is so unjust, and then they cannot find food, and that is why they are in hunger. Well, Samir said that Samir's response to the mother was, then we have to change the world. So that is why he felt he was a communist starting at the age of 6. Well, he formally became a Communist Party member at the age of 17 when he was in Paris. So we can also try to imagine Samir at the age of 15 when he was still a secondary school student in 1946, where there was the very dynamic movement of the worker and peasant committees in the Cairo University. And at the age of 25, that was 1956, from June to September, Samir was in Port Said, and at that time, it happened that the Suez Canal was nationalized, and then there was the invasion of the Western powers. At the age of 37, that was 1968, he happened to be in France between May and July, and was there with the students in struggle. Well, we had actually put together a short video with Samir's pictures and also with some short clips of him talking about his happy and sad moments. But unfortunately, because of various reasons, we cannot show it now, but you can see the link on the leaflet that we are putting out. So Samir said that personally for him, his happiest moment in his life was meeting Isabel. They met, and then they began living together after a few days. Well, that is love at first sight. But the saddest moment for him was the loss of his daughter. And other happy moments for him was the Chinese Revolution. He became a Communist Party member at the age of 17. That was 1948. And in 1949, there was the Chinese Revolution. And he was very much energized by that. And his saddest moments was when the Soviet Union broke down. He had anticipated that, but then he had hoped it wouldn't happen so soon. Well, Samir is a beautiful example of how we allow ourselves to be open and responsive to the challenges of the times and to appreciate the strength and the energy of the people, of the oppressed. Of the Egyptian revolution, Samir's words are, "It did not change the system, but it changed the people." 2 weeks ago, on December 7th and 8th, we organized a conference in Tsinghua University in Beijing to pay tribute to Samir. We discussed Samir's theories and appreciated their relevance to China today. Intellectuals in China know Samir well. Over a dozen of his books have been translated into Chinese. He is known to love China and the Chinese people because there are hard-won gains of the revolution that need to be defended. Samir joined the French Communist Party, and he was so happily amazed by the revolution. And he was also very much encouraged by the Vietnamese Revolution that defeated France and the USA, which was an example of a so-called small people defeating two powerful imperialists.